I'm Avery Davidson. Thank you for joining us for this special edition of This Week in Louisiana Agriculture, the only TV show bringing Louisiana farmers and consumers together every week. My partner, Kristen Oaks-White, has the week off, and that's because this week we're bringing Louisiana farmers and consumers together with the candidates running to live in this house. This is the governor's mansion in Baton Rouge. Currently, Governor John Bel Edwards has been the resident for the past 4 years, but there are two others vying for the position and wanting to live in this house, Congressman Ralph Abraham and businessman Eddie Rispone. We're going to interview all of the candidates and let you see where they stand on the issues. We're going to start with the incumbent, John Bel Edwards. Now, he grew up in Amite on a dairy farm and went on to serve in the military as an Airborne Ranger. In 2007, he was elected to the House of Representatives here in the state of Louisiana until he was elected governor and started living here. Well, Governor, I appreciate you taking the time to meet with us here on This Week in Louisiana Agriculture. First, let's go back 4 years. What made you decide that you wanted to run for governor? And let's bring it forward 4 years and say, actually it was more than 4 years ago, because I remember seeing your video in 2013.
Yeah. No, so 2 full years before the election, I had made the decision and really started working to make sure that we would be successful in that campaign. And there were a lot of reasons, but principal among them was the disinvestment that I had seen in higher education. In the 8 years before I became governor, we cut higher education more than any other state in the nation and raised tuition more than any other state in the nation. And that, along with some bad budgeting practices, the perpetual deficits that we saw year after year, and the devastating impact of those cuts that often weren't just felt at the beginning of the fiscal year, but mid-year budget cuts, led me to believe that there was a much better way forward. So I decided to run for governor. But with respect to higher education, those cuts had a disproportionate adverse impact on our ag centers because they don't have students, and so tuition dollars don't flow to the ag centers either at LSU or at Southern. And that was adversely impacting their entire operations around the state of Louisiana, including research that needed to be done. And so it was imperative to me that we stabilize support for higher education immediately, which we were able to do when I came into office, but then turn the corner and actually start investing more over time as we are able to do that. And we actually did that this year with the first net new investment in general fund in higher education in Louisiana in a decade. And this has been particularly beneficial to the ag centers for the reasons that I just mentioned. So that's why I ran principally, but there were a lot of reasons. And you know, it's borne out, I believe, in the fact that we are doing so much better in Louisiana today on just about every front relative to where we were 4 years ago. But that higher education, along with just the general bad budgeting practices and the instability, the deficit after deficit after deficit, just led me to believe there was a better way and that I should offer myself for public service as governor. I'm glad I did. It's been a challenging but very rewarding 4 years, and I think the best is ahead of us. I'm excited about the next 4 years.
Well, with that excitement, what made you decide to say, you know what, I'm going to go for it again? Was it that the work wasn't finished, or you still have a vision going on?
Well, you know, the work is never finished. There's always more that you can do. And look, even though we are much better off, the size of our economy is the largest it has ever been, growing at faster rate than the national average. This amount of personal income, the highest in our history, growing at more than the national average. Unemployment, the lowest in almost 12 years. We led the nation in decline in unemployment over the last 12 months. Debt, we're paying off our debt so that it's decreasing for the first time since 2008. So many reasons why we're doing much better off, but we still have challenges. The educational outcomes are not what we want them to be. We still have work to do on healthcare outcomes, although we're doing much, much better. In fact, just last week, it was announced that we have an 8% uninsured rate, by far the lowest in our history, and actually lower than the national average. Now, when is the last time the state of Louisiana was a leading state when it came to the rate of people who had health insurance, the percentage of people with health insurance? It's never happened before. But there are still challenges out there, and I believe we have a lot of momentum. The state was deep in the ditch when I became governor. We're on the road now, and we're on the road to a brighter future. But elections have consequences, and if we elect people with the same failed policies and philosophical views that caused us to go into the ditch to begin with, all the progress that we made will be lost. And so I am committed to continuing the progress, to continue to address challenges that face the state of Louisiana, and certainly a second term therefore is in order because we need more time to do that.
Facing challenges is what farmers, ranchers, and their children do every day. You have an ag background yourself, growing up in Tangipahoa Parish. Tell me a little bit about your dairy farm experience.
Yeah, well, so I grew up in Amite in northern Tangipahoa Parish. My dad owned a dairy farm. We ran the dairy farm, but I also worked at some of the produce farms in the area during the summer, and worked really, really hard at that, and those days were hot. But it just gave me a real appreciation for a good, honest day's work, but also the quality of life that you get when you're in the agricultural arena, whether it's dairying or produce farms or whatever. And it really helped to shape me in terms of work ethic, but also, again, my appreciation for what farmers go through, because it is tough. I mean, you got to deal with commodity prices, you got to deal with the prices of all the inputs, you got to deal with the weather, and you don't have much control over any of those things. And so it really is a tough but great way to live, and it's an honest way to live, and it does so much good. I mean, $11 billion is the economic impact of agriculture in the state of Louisiana. I mean, just think about that. That is absolutely huge what they contribute, but they contribute at least as much to the quality of life, the way of life that we have enjoyed here in Louisiana for hundreds of years, and that's why I'm so proud to associate myself with the agricultural folks across the state of Louisiana.
Did that way of life and work ethic translate into what you did in the military? Did that apply there? Well,
yeah. So, it's not so hard to be at first formation at 6 o'clock in the morning if you used to be at the dairy barn at 4 o'clock in the morning, right? So you do learn about discipline. You learn to make sure that you develop that work ethic, that you're going to be successful. And by the way, not just in military life, but I get started early as governor too, and we work late because it has been a challenging almost 4 years now, but it's also been a very good 4 years. But that background, being reared the way that I was in Tangipahoa Parish, Louisiana, I think has helped me in many, many ways.
You mentioned about the challenges over the past 4 years, budget being one of the major ones. During that time, some folks were looking at agricultural exemptions when it comes to sales taxes on feed, seed, fertilizer, and other inputs. You worked to help protect those. Tell me a little bit about how much of a challenge that was and your plans for those exemptions in the future.
Well, first of all, just to put it in perspective, the budget deficit for the first full year after I became governor was more than $2 billion. By far the largest in our state's history. And that was a really, really tough time. We did everything we could to enact meaningful cuts, real cuts, to find real savings. But quite frankly, that budget deficit was about 3 times what we believed it to be in terms of the structural budget deficit of the state of Louisiana. And so then you had to work with legislative leaders, Republicans and Democrats, urban and rural, to try to figure out what are we going to do to solve this problem so that we don't continue to cut higher education, for example, that we were talking about a while ago, so that we can fund our TOPS program. But one of the things that I ruled out immediately, and I did this in conversations with farmers and ranchers all over the state of Louisiana, but also working with the Commissioner of Agriculture, we were not going to remove or reduce the exemptions on sales tax, for example, with respect to feed, seed, fertilizer, those inputs. And we didn't. I think there was one relatively small component that was inadvertently hit and nobody realized it was going to happen. And then the very next special session, we fixed that. So that demonstrates my commitment, I believe, to agriculture in Louisiana and trying to make sure that it is sustainable, that it is profitable, because if you can go through the worst budget deficit in the history and successfully address it without putting those exemptions on the table, then I don't think there's anything else that anyone could say or do that would demonstrate a stronger commitment to the folks involved in agriculture in the state of Louisiana than what we've already done. Another thing that we did, as you know, is we went over the state of Louisiana on ag tours. We went to every corner of the state, whether it was ranchers, farmers, timber interests, whatever. We went out and had those meetings, and that sort of ratified in my mind that we had taken the right approach, because all over the state of Louisiana, people were thanking us for resolving that budget deficit without reducing or eliminating those exemptions that are so important.
One of the things I remember on that tour that people brought up were roads, bridges. Ag haulers are being adversely affected by high insurance costs as well. What are you going to do in the next 4 years to help out, especially with ag haulers, and be it logging trucks or folks who are hauling grain to and from the elevators? Yeah.
Well, first of all, as you remember, one of the things we heard was in rural Louisiana, there are a lot of bridges that have posted weight limits that are below what they need to haul in order to be efficient in the way that they move things in and out of commerce. And so we've already identified, working with Sean Wilson, the Secretary of Transportation, we've identified more than $90 million that over the next 3 years will be brought to bear on rural bridges across Louisiana, above and beyond the normal Highway Priority Program. 50 million of that came from the bill this year, where we're going to bond out the BP payments, and 50 million will go to bridges. But 40 million. We had already identified 54 million at the Department of Transportation that was going to go there. And then with the recently announced surplus from last week, we know that there will be additional dollars as well that we'll be able to put into bridges all over Louisiana to address that problem, because that was probably the most recurring concern that was aired to me and to the commissioner on that tour around the state of Louisiana. And now, with respect to insurance rates, we're going to, and I had a conversation with Buck Vanderstein about this just the other day, by the way, at the Louisiana Forestry Association. We're going to convene a task force, a small group, to come up with those things that can be agreed upon to see whether we can have an impact. On the automobile side, you know, there's actually been some positive movement. State Farm has reduced rates 3 times in the last year. Several other large carriers have done it as well. But it doesn't seem to work into the other arena where, you know, for example, the folks who are hauling logs and so forth. And so we're going to have to figure out what we can do to impact that market as well. And I'm committed to doing that. And I know there are some things that can be agreed upon. One of the challenges we had this past session, there was an omnibus bill that contained about 5 different ideas. Well, I think about 2 of those could have been done. There was enough opposition to the other 3 that the entire bill fizzled out. But we can pull those things out that we can agree upon and go ahead and get those enacted. And I also believe that we can do a better job in Louisiana regulating insurance carriers so that we can have a positive impact on premiums as well. And so it needs to be a holistic approach. And I'm committed to doing that and making sure that we can move forward. The other thing we're going to do is make sure that there's more economic opportunity too. So we're working really hard, for example, to bring additional sawmills into Louisiana. And I can't announce anything today, but we believe we're really close on some major positive announcements in Louisiana that would be very helpful because it would be more business for the same people that are going through such a difficult time right now.
That kind of leads into the second to last question I have for you, which is, what are your plans for agriculture over the next 4 years? I mean, obviously, attracting more value add, like you're talking about with the timber industry, would be a big deal.
Yeah, so there are some things that we are doing right now that are going to prove to be very beneficial. So a chambering yard in West Baton Rouge, so that we can get long trains in there so that they can haul grain, for example, to Dreyfus, but also to make sure that we can haul the product here to Drax, and make sure that we are continuing to harvest timber in Morehouse Parish, for example, making the wood pellets and bringing them down for export. Working to make sure we have more cold storage capacity at the port in New Orleans so that the poultry operations can grow in order to meet the demand that we actually have. The limiting factor right now is our ability to store things with cold storage and be able to freeze the chicken before we export it. Continuing to work to make sure that we are investing in research so that we stay ahead of the game. You know, that's been so critically important to our success over the generations, and it's a very short-sighted approach when you cut research because we know that there are fewer farmers feeding more people every single day, and so we have to be better at it. We're going to continue to work to press to make sure that the tariff situation gets resolved just as soon as it possibly can, because that is having an adverse impact upon farmers, especially grain growers, because the market that they're used to having in certain places just isn't there right now the way that it used to be, especially with respect to China and soybeans. And so I have personally met with President Trump and sent him a letter encouraging him to be successful, and we're all counting on successful resolution to these trade disputes, but to do it as soon as possible so that stability in the world markets would return and our markets would return, and we would have the ability to export. Continuing to make sure that we're promoting our products around the world, whether it's Mexico or Cuba, wherever we go, because I think we grow the best farm products anywhere in the world. And we really do in Louisiana, to a very large degree, feed the world. Especially when you look at the fact that 60% of the grain exported from the United States is exported through our ports. You know, that is absolutely important that we continue to do that. And when we dredge to 50 feet all the way to Baton Rouge, we will get to about 75% of all grains exported from the United States will come through Louisiana. So I think all of that benefits farmers here because they'll have more market for their product. So we're going to continue to work with the folks at LSU and Southern for research, work with the various stakeholders all around the state, Farm Bureau, and the Commissioner of Agriculture, so that we are good partners in promoting this industry that means so much to our state. I mentioned it earlier, I think $11 billion. And so it is, you know, you hear it all the time, this industry is the backbone of whatever. Agriculture really is the backbone of Louisiana when it comes to our economy, and we have to make sure, and our way of life, and we have to promote it.
Very positive, very affirmative on the outlook. On TV, we've seen from some of the PACs some negative ads against everybody. So I wanted to ask you, what could you say positive about the other two candidates in this race?
Well, look, first of all, in today's age, with all of the silliness that comes across social media and the nastiness that comes when you run for office, just to have people who are willing to put themselves in the race and subject themselves to all of that, you know, I think that's a positive thing. And I commend both Eddie Risponi and Ralph Abraham for doing that. Obviously, I have very fundamental disagreements with their specific policy prescriptions. I think they would take us back to 4 years ago because they sound an awful lot like Governor Jindal, which I believe left our state in a terrible, terrible place. But those are policy disagreements. They don't have to be personal disagreements, and they're not. And you know, and I just appreciate them for offering themselves to public service, and I think that does speak about well of them in terms of what they would like to see our state move forward. I just think that their specific policy prescriptions would have the opposite impact on the state and would actually cause us to move backwards.
Well, Governor Edwards, thank you so much for your time today and for bringing chickens back to the governor's mansion.
We got them here, and I get about 12 eggs a day.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Still to come on Twyla, we sit down and speak with Congressman Ralph Abraham, Republican from Alto, Louisiana.